Good evening. Welcome back to another episode of the Indiana Jones Minute. Before we begin tonight's performance, we have a few brief announcements. Actually, just one.
That's not what Vincent Price would do.
No. You sound like one of the, who were they? The Silver Spoons? What were they? The Jaybirds? What was the, we talked about them in like the first episode.
The Jordanaires.
The Jordanaires.
or the Ink Spots.
Yeah.
The Ink Spots.
Yeah. Pete's
Yeah.
doing his ink spot impression.
Yeah, that was Pete's. I'll do the, oh, we can do the Ink. I'll be the Jordanaires. Pete, you be the Ink Spots. You ready?
Well, what do I do?
If I didn't care,
If he didn't care,
would
he'd
all
tell you that
this-
before we start today's episode, we have a special announcement. We don't want to do this, but we're going to be taking a brief hiatus after minute 55. We're leaving Indiana Jones in mid-confusion right now with his buddy Mutt. Some dissolving conquistadors surrounding them. But we'll be back after we figure out the mystery of the magnetic gold and come back to you with... This is falling apart.
This is
Minute
the absolute
56.
worst announcement of all time. We're taking
God
a
knows
Fermata,
we
everybody.
We're taking a Fermata, everybody.
Yeah, go look up Fermata. That's what we're doing right now.
We're halfway through the movie, and we're going to take a brief little hiatus to refresh and to make sure that our episodes are up to our exacting standards of. I'm not exactly going to say quality, but
We know that each episode, at least one of us has gone mad by the end of the
Mhm.
episode, by the end of the season. So we want to avoid that and just keep things fresh and good and happy. And whether that includes quality will be up to you. But yeah, we're not ditching you. We'll fill this feed with some bonus episodes every once in a while we're away. And if you still want to catch us on Patreon, you can do that. Patreon.com/Indiana Jones Minute. We'll be there with all of our bonus episodes for your support of the show. And we'll be back in all our glory after we've gotten our ducks in a row.
No, figure
No.
out this.
don't say that.
Yeah. I should never start a sentence without knowing how it ends.
Figure out this ball of twine.
Yeah, we'll be back in a reasonable amount of time, depending on who's defining reasonable.
Right.
Much shorter than a regular between season hiatus.
Right. But the good news is we're leaving you with minute 55, which is a fantastic episode.
Oh, our guest today is absolutely out of this world great.
Yeah. So we're gonna leave you on a high note so you'll miss us even more, and our return will be even more triumphant.
Da, 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 da.
See you soon, everybody.
See you soon.
What are you doing? See you soon, everybody.
Indiana Jones, Indiana Jones, Indiana. It's a podcast about Indiana Jones. Every movie, 1 minute at a time. Indiana Jones, Minute.
Welcome back to the Indiana Jones Minute. This is the podcast where we are inexplicably attracted to the film Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull 1 minute at a time. My name is Tom Taylor.
My name is Pete Mummert.
I'm the intern, Jerry Porter.
And I guess I am the guest star, David Anderson.
Hooray!
Welcome, David Anderson.
Hey.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I've followed you on Twitter for a long time. You've got a very lively and cool Twitter account.
Well, thank you. I try to not bore myself there when I can.
And you're a professor or at Radford?
Yes, that's correct. So I am an assistant professor of anthropology at Radford University, and sort of my bread and butter is that I am a Maya archaeologist, but I also have considerable interest and expertise in pseudo-archaeological claims. So things, the people who actually think they have found crystal skulls, stuff like that.
Wait, pseudo?
People like Indiana Jones.
There's some overlap here.
Have you had to walk a lot of letters through Mayan?
A lot of letters.
Did it take you longer than 30 seconds?
There's a scene earlier in this movie where Indy gets a letter from his friend Ox, and it's like in some, I don't remember what the ancient language is, and he says, "I'll just walk it through Mayan here first."
I believe, I meant to rewatch the whole thing before coming on here, but I just watched the minute we're going to talk about tonight. But I think they claimed it was an Olmec, which I remember rolling my eyes when the movie came out, because it's like there's, Olmec writing's not really a thing. I mean, there's a couple of glyphs, but it's not much of a concerted writing system.
Wow. This movie,
Yeah.
I tell you. Well, all right. Let's talk about this movie. Let's talk about minute 55 of this movie, which begins with Indy holding the skull, the crystal skull, as Mutt's lantern is attracted to it. And then it ends with Indy launching into his explanation of this crime scene.
So this is it, huh? Here we are, the crystal skull. We've arrived.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Take a look.
I have a general question. Is this what, like, in Indy's hand? Is Indy holding the alien's skull? Like, so his skeleton is made of quartz?
Supposedly.
And does that mean
I guess.
so? I mean, in a way that could be convenient. Say you're the alien, you break your arm, and you just go to like a crystal shop in Sedona, Arizona, and
Mhm.
you can just get like a replacement.
But it's going to be pink.
It's true. You can probably pick. I mean, but is that what this is supposed? So the alien's skeleton is quartz.
I'm not even sure why he calls it quartz. He leaps out and says quartz. He just latches onto that, and I don't know what he bases that on.
The skulls that have actually been alleged to be found are quartz, and so I'm sure that's to a certain extent where the connection comes from for the movie. I do sort of, I mean, one of the big things in the minute we're talking about is that they have it as magnetic or sort of magnetic, and so that's obviously not a quartz property. So I think perhaps he's just assuming it's quartz, but it's really alien osteology.
Wow, that's
Well,
the word. Osteology. I
There you
like
go.
that.
Pete, get us an osteologist on the,
Yeah.
on the phone.
Well, I've got a few in my back pocket I can call
Oh,
for
please
this
do. Yeah,
episode.
thank you.
Beautiful.
Excellent. It'll be your
We're getting to
lifeline.
that age where we're going to need our own osteologist, though.
Yeah, really. But I actually give this movie a few points for, like, as you just said, it's not magnetic, and it's ridiculous that it's magnetic, but they say that. They actually say that in the movie. Like, they for some reason, they've latched onto this to be smart about and to tell the audience, okay, we do know that this is fake. We're making this up. This is like a space thing. This is some sort of space magnetism or something. You know, we've by now we've just been tripping and stumbling over all these historical and scientific facts that are just out of nowhere and are nonsense that the movie tries to pass off as fact. But for some reason here they get it together. Like, no, we know it's weird and it's adding to the mystery. It's cool.
Well, here's the thing, actually. When I watched this minute, outside of this sort of pseudo-magnetism, they are actually very deliberately drawing on some real claims from, for lack of a better term, the paranormal world. The people actually have these skulls and make claims about them. The movie, this minute and the rest of the movie, actually, they know their paranormal literature, basically. And most of the stuff that they say about the skull in here is they don't make up. They just turn it into a movie.
Interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Huh.
But the problem is that most of that lore is all fake and made up, right? So
Well, it depends on who you ask. I would say it is, but they're definitely engaging in it. And there's some very direct allusions in this movie to one of the most famous crystal skull, which is known as the Mitchell Hedges skull,
Yes.
which was allegedly found by Frederick Mitchell Hedges, but was made famous in the 1970s by his adopted daughter Anna. And like one of the right out of the gate, when Indy picks up the skull, when he first finds it, he says, it has a couple of lines in there that the skull is carved against the grain or across the grain or something like this when he picks up. This is actually something that Anna sort of said about her skull. It's very interesting. When she first brought out the Mitchell Hedges skull, or what she called it, the Skull of Doom, in the 1970s, and started exhibiting it at New Age spiritual fairs. And people would line up to feel this skull and interact with the skull and feel its energy. And at one point, she actually starts talking about the skull as being prophetic and being sort of it would sweat before major world catastrophes.
Oh, wow.
So do I.
Yes, exactly. And she, people started to question this, like, well, where did you actually get it? Is this really authentic? Is this really a real thing? And so she tries to have it authenticated, and she shows it to this guy, Frank Dorland, who is supposedly a crystal expert and an expert art historian, or sort of expert from the art market. And this idea that he says this, he's the one who says that her skull was carved against the grain, which is funny, is what they say. They say this, they repeat this in the movie, and clearly the intention from Dorland and clearly the intention in the movie is that this is impossible. No one can do this.
Right.
And it's said again and again about these skulls. No one can replicate these skulls. Well, the funny thing is that quartz crystal does not have a grain to which you could carve against. So like the entire comment is sort of bullshit, if I can say that on this podcast.
Hey, yes, it's wonderful. You just did.
Dorland uses it, which also Indy in the movie sort of uses it to suggest that it's very, very old, and that it can't just be associated with for Anna, this was allegedly a Maya crystal skull. In the movie, obviously, they associate it with South America. They try to make that a thing that like no one can replicate these things today. And it's like, actually, you totally can.
So it's funny. They actually make a point in the movie, like you said, this is not the Mitchell Hedges skull. Like they go into the lore of the Mitchell Hedges, and the first time Indy brings it up, he's like, "There's nothing really to it. It's just like a thing. It's kind of there's nothing magical about it or anything." And then he says this is not the Mitchell. So they're making a point that there is a fake thing out there, but then he's saying the same things about this apparently authentic one that's actually like the skull of an alien. He's saying all the same things about the Mitchell Hedges skull to say why it's authentic, which is
even the no tool marks thing is one of the things that the frequent comments that is made about the Mitchell Hedges skull is that it has no tool marks. Of course, if you look at it under an electronic scanning microscope, it actually does have tool marks. But they pull this out. They're echoing everything that's been said about the Mitchell Hedges skull and some of the others. Like you said, though, shifting the blame, so to speak, and putting it on a different object rather than the Mitchell Hedges skull itself.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious. You had a fascinating piece in Forbes quite recently about Aztec obsidian mirrors, or so-called Aztec obsidian mirrors. And I was wondering if I called you up and like, David, I've got this crystal skull. My uncle found it in central Mexico. It was used in sacrifices. It can kill people. It can do all these magical things. And you come out and I'd say, would you examine it? Like, how would you go about examining? What are the kinds of scientific things you would do to examine it?
Well, and this is the thing, is that once you have an object out of context, there's not a lot you can do. Like if you find it in an excavation, it's very easy to say, here's where it is, here what is found association with. This is why looting is such a problem in archaeology, because once you remove an object from its context, we lose so much information. You can figure out what the raw material is sometimes by visual examination or some other trace element examinations. And under microscope or other examination tools, you might be able to get some information about how it was manufactured. And that's what actually the archaeologist Jane Walsh, who works with the Smithsonian, has done with the Mitchell Hedges skull and some others. She's actually put them under electron scanning microscope and identified tool marks on them. And this is how we know that these are, let me step back. This is how she argues that these are modern day replicas, because under electron scanning microscope, the Mitchell Hedges skull, along with a couple of others from museum collections, all show linear striations under the microscope that are similar to marks that are produced by jewelers' wheels.
Oh.
She also looked at one crystal object from the site of Monte Alban in Oaxaca, Mexico, that was found in an excavation context. So we know it's authentic. We know it's from these from the Oaxacan site, and that one did not have the linear striation marks. It had sort of, they're all mixed up and all going in different directions. And so she argued that one was carved using sort of sand and water. And so she said, like, here's one crystal object from a known excavation context, and the striations on it are fundamentally different from all of these skulls, which we don't have excavation context for. And those skulls show marks that these, they look like modern jewelers' wheels. Ergo, they're modern fakes.
Would Indy, and because in the beginning of this movie, Indy and Mudd are talking, and he says he and Harold Oxley were obsessed with the Mitchell Hedges skull back in college. And would they have had the technology, like back even at the time this movie set in the 50s, to know these things about it, or would they not have?
I don't think so. I mean, literally this Mitchell Hedges skull had not come to light. It was allegedly found in the 20s, but it wasn't publicly displayed till the 70s. I couldn't actually tell you when an electron scanning microscope came into use, but I don't think it would have been as early as, Indy's time, so to speak, even in this movie. And certainly this was an actual problem before the skulls were put under electron scanning microscope. When you put a polished quartz crystal under a regular microscope, it just reflects a lot of light and is really hard to look at. So these, were in the late 19th century when they were first came into the museum collections. It was very hard to do anything with these when they first came into museum collections. Basically, the first crystal skull we know of shows up in the British Museum in the 1890s, and they buy it, we know now, from a French antiquities dealer, Eugene Boban. And they basically buy it from Boban because he's a French diplomat, or he was a French diplomat who had worked in Mexico, and everyone knew the Aztec-like skulls, and they had a couple of other crystal objects from the Aztec, and so just like skull, diplomat, Aztec crystal, sure, why not? It must be real. They had no real way to authenticate it at the time.
This, this whole thing just plays like an episode of Ripley's Believe It or Don't. They
Ripley's I Believe It.
Well, this is what I one of the things I love most about all of this in terms of Jane Walsh's work and how all this stuff comes together, and whether we believe it or not. Because if you go back, like this guy that Anna had, this man Frank Dorland, examine the crystal or the skull, and he suggested by looking at it, it was so hard to carve, it must have been carved by advanced tools. And he says it's so hard to carve, it must have been so long ago. He actually suggests, based on I don't know what, but he says it must be 12,000 years old. And it's actually from this notion that the crystal skulls actually start, in some people's minds, being associated with things like Atlantis and aliens. And it's the most beautiful epistemological moment in my mind when Jane Walsh got her hands on. She did her analyses on some of these skulls in the one the British Museum had, one of the ones the Smithsonian has, and after she had proved her proof of concept and had done this a couple of times, she eventually was able to put the Mitchell Hedges skull to examination, and she found it had the same tool marks, the same so-called advanced tool marks on it. And so for Walsh, this was boom. 19th century jeweler's wheel. It's a fake. For Bill Holman, who is the current owner of the Mitchell Hedges skull and who believes this to be a mystical artifact, Holman was equally excited by the advanced tool marks on the skull, because to him that proved it wasn't of Maya origin, and therefore it must be of older origin. It must be Aztec or alien in origin, because it has an advanced tool marks on it. And I use this example in my classroom all the time. Yeah, that totally works. If you ignore the context, you throw all the context out, and we just talk about the skull and advanced tool marks, then he's just as right as she is in this space. Of course, she has some other context on her side that he doesn't have, but it's like, it's like this is all a big story of what do you believe and what framework or worldview are you working in, because for Holman, it's like, good God, this is great. It's got advanced tool marks on it. That proves it's Atlantean or alien in origin.
Well, yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
People love believing stuff, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I like that Indy's first line in this minute. Like if you put question marks at the end of each thing he says, it could sound totally like a voiceover from Ancient Aliens. No tool
It
marks,
is.
a single piece of seamless quartz.
But then he does actually ask a question, and it's one of my favorite lines, maybe in the whole series
Oh,
of Indiana Jones. He's looking at Mutt, and he's holding the skull, and he goes, "What is this thing?" And he's like kind of delighted. He's like,
yeah.
I don't know what I'm holding in my hands right now. I'm Indiana Jones. I've seen a lot of crazy stuff. I've been in wonder. I've been in awe. I've been excited. I've had gold lust, but I can't. I'm a doctor. I'm a professor. I'm a scientist. I can't explain what this thing is. And that you've never seen that before on
See,
Indiana
that's
Jones. and it's kinda
amazing
fun.
because
Yeah.
he's like unabashed.
my
just
note
weirded out.
is my indilibrium is off because I can't stand that. I'm like, that's not at all Indiana Jones. And he turns to like 19-year-old Mutt that he doesn't know he's his son. And he doesn't care what this kid
Yeah.
thinks
Right.
at all. He's like making, dance on your own dime. And then all of a sudden, like, yeah, he would never
Right.
turn to Mutt and invite Mutt into his, his question and mystery. He would never do that. He might do
know.
that if it's Sala. He might, he might do it if it's, what's her name from Last Crusade?
I disagree. I think he's sort of under the wire, sort of developing a little connection to Mutt. I think like a couple minutes ago we saw like, he kind of complimented Mutt. He said, "Hey, you're not as dumb as you look," or something like. I forget what he said. He kind of gave a sort of a backhanded compliment, and Mutt was like delighted. He's like, "Wow, Professor Jones!" He thought I was kind of smart, and I think Indy gets that. And I think there's a little bit of a he doesn't know he's his son, and he is sort of a punk and a weirdo. But Indy's kind of like even later in this minute, he's like they both started they figure out the same thing at the same time. Like Mutt says, "Oh, maybe this is the skull from Akator," and I don't know. Like I feel like there's a little bit of a not scientific connection between them, but they're
But
they're
that's
on the
the
same
problem.
page.
Indiana
They're
Jones would
appreciating
never
figuring stuff out.
be on the same page with Mutt. And there's no other time that he treats
don't
Mutt.
know.
He's not on the same page with him. Now, I agree if he gave him a chin chuck and he said, "Hey, you did well back there, kid." You know what I mean? You're like, that's where he is with them. They are developing a little...
I don't think they're at the chin chuck stage. yet.
Well, if they're not at the chin chuck stage, there's no way Indiana Jones is going to fully expose all of his wonderment, and I have no idea what's going on. I've met Yahweh, I've drank from the Holy Grail, and I'm completely flummoxed. He's not going to expose himself like that to 19-year-old Marlon Brando fake-ass Mutt.
And this is where I that line, "I don't know what this is," to me speaks, I think, more to Lucas than it does to Indy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was like a screenwriter note that he just left in by accident. Turn it
The
into dialogue.
the rumors that were circling long before this movie came out, because of course they spent years trying to make the fourth Indiana
Yeah.
Jones movie, right?
Damn 20.
And my understanding, at least from not working in Hollywood, but it's just that the rumor that had been circulating for a long time was that every time Lucas kept coming back with a script, there was one hook, there was one thing he wouldn't change, no matter how much Spielberg and Harrison Ford objected. And I've always wondered, I think that is either the Crystal Skull itself, or that it has to be aliens somehow in
Yeah.
all of this.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I think this is like Lucas wanted that. He wanted that moment where everything else in the other movies was explainable. Like, oh, it's all connected, and you have Indiana Jones is expert in not just archaeology but the occult, but he always knows what he's doing.
Mhm.
Whereas, like, I
Mhm.
think Lucas desperately wanted that moment where, like, no, we don't know what he's doing, or there is a bigger universe out there that he doesn't understand.
So I really like it when you put it like that. Like,
Yeah.
I like that sense of wonder that they're trying to put in here.
Because we've had this back and forth with other guests about like, well, this kind of doesn't feel like an Indiana Jones movie because it's so earthbound and so scientific and so explainable and measurable. It's lost the sort of mystical, sort of, as you say, occult sort of,
Mhm.
religious aspect. and it's too worldly. But I've never let go of the idea that I think that's it. I like seeing Indiana Jones totally like this is what I do. I try to find stuff, amazing stuff, and I found something that I can't explain. It's not part of my schooling. It's not part of what I know. I like that. I like that he's finding something that is just beyond him. It's like brand
Well,
new.
it's part and parcel too. Like I guess maybe not Temple of the Doom. I was going to say so much of the original three movies is more of Western in origin, but I guess that's really more
Right.
movies 1 and 3.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
this, I mean, I was excited to see this movie come out because they're finally moving into Latin America. They're moving
Yeah.
into my cultural zone of interest, and
Mhm.
it was fun to see them play in that world. And it is a world that, yeah, I think Jones was inherently less comfortable in, and it speaks to me because there's a huge divide in archaeology. Like either you work in Europe, Africa, and Asia, or you work in the Americas. And there's a pretty big gulf between the archaeologists who work in one part of the one hemisphere or the other, and we don't necessarily speak each other's languages when we
Wow.
jump hemispheres.
Is there a lot of sort of cross pollination between Mesoamerica and like South America?
Yeah, when running north and south between the Americas, I mean, certainly my field specialization is working in Central America and Mexico, but yeah, I'm far more familiar just in terms of work colleagues, data, and sites and whatnot. I'm far more familiar with South America than I am sometimes with, say, what's going on in Asia or Europe sometimes.
Tommy, you brought up earlier, we talked about the magnetism of the skull and, how, okay, so it's not really magnetic. So I'm wondering, is the alien just grabbing whatever the hell it wants? Yeah, it's really,
Using the
because
force,
it
yeah.
takes like a gold
The magnetic
coin. It
force.
takes Mutt's switchblade. I like that it draws the lantern so that it's like well lit. You know what I mean? It kind of takes grabs
Yeah,
the
get my
light.
good side.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But then that doesn't really explain why it's like, okay, how did Harrison Ford, or why did he think it was magnetic at the very beginning of the movie? And then if he throws the whatever it was, the shotgun shells up in the air, and all of a sudden they all run to the skull,
Mm-hmm.
it still doesn't. There's still no continuity there. Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
why.
Well,
don't
yeah,
think-
like he's got his he's got his gun right now. His gun's not flying towards it.
Eh.
And so what
There's
I'm
a lot of
saying,
stuff.
if he must have tested it at some point, or he saw it in action at some point, but it's not magnetic. He thinks it's magnetic, but it actually isn't. So how would he know that would? Why would that work again?
And to me, this a lot comes down to sort of presumed psychic forces associated with crystal skulls.
Mhm.
Like, they use it later to repel things too, don't they? If I'm recalling correctly in the movie.
They just repel the audience.
I honestly don't remember.
Fair
I've
enough.
seen this movie a handful of times. I don't remember. What
I was thinking there was like some bugs or something swarming them, and that sort of swarms around.
Oh,
I
so
think
it doesn't
you're
touch
right.
the
I
skull.
think-
Yeah,
right,
I think
yeah.
you're right. Totally.
Yep.
So there's, to me, this hits the new age spiritualism that these skulls sort of resonate with so much, where they produce energy fields, and those energy fields can repel or repulse or draw things in or whatever else. And so I see this again sort of hitting very specifically into the paranormal and spiritual literature that this stuff was sort of rooted in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's because I mean, without thinking about that, I'm always like, oh, is it just supposed to be? It's from space, so it's a different kind of magnet. Like it has different magnetic properties that we don't have here on Earth, or something like that. But yeah, I mean that what you're saying makes sense, especially. If
Yeah, I
part
think
of
it's
that
like
lore
energy
anyway.
field rather than magnetism, so to speak, and apparently a very selective energy field at that.
Yeah, whatever the script requires it to attract. it will
Exactly.
attract.
So, I have a big question, and David, maybe you can illuminate this for us. Indy's, I just want to be clear what Indy is suggesting here in this minute, like how they arrived here and what they found, and then sort of what I am supposed to believe, or what Indy is believing, is that, the Spanish pilfered all the gold from the Nazca. And then they also, while they were, hunting for the gold, they found the skull, and they're going back to the port. They're going to ship, the gold and the skull back to Spain. But the Nazca caught up with them. They killed them. they killed all whatever it is, 7 guys, and then they left the gold and their skull god, but they mummified them.
Yeah.
What's the problem, Jerry?
Yeah. Is there a question?
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions.
It's just what you do.
All questions.
I mean that's what I'm trying to figure out what they're what they're leading me to believe here. I'm like, what that makes they would. So why wouldn't they take the gold back to? Why wouldn't the Nazca take the gold back or take their their god skull back? Why would they leave it there in the tomb, all nice and cozy, like with everybody wrapped up?
And even before that, is he saying that Oriana and his men went to Akator and got the skull and the loot from there, or they found it somewhere else on the way back?
He's not very clear, but then we do get a little piece of new information. Is he conjectures, also very ancient alien style, that the Spaniards' ships are along the shore, and so this is a new wrinkle. Like apparently they didn't walk over land from Brazil here; they sailed.
Ooh, yeah, because if you had the ships on the Pacific coast, that's not really right either, right? In this whole process.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute.
yeah.
You're
Right, yeah.
assuming that they're boats. What if they mean alien ships?
Oh,
Ships.
they're gonna hitch a ride.
Well, they're Spanish ships, right? So is there
Maybe.
We'll give you your head back
the
if you give us
Spanish
a
have
ride.
UFOs?
Maybe that's what they're talking about. Actually, can you also, what is the David, if you can, what is sort of the general mythology here between like aliens, crystal skulls, Nazca lines? Like they're trying to weave this web all together. I'm sorry. I
Oh
didn't
no,
mean
and it is a web. A web is the right word.
It's like one of those. There's sort of it kind of a little bit in Raiders, where they talk about the Ark of the Covenant. And we know what that is, and okay, yeah. There's something of the Pharaoh and the Hebrews, and didn't you guys ever go to the Sunday school? I'm trying to create that world over here. What's the mythology here that they're tapping into, where we all kind of go, oh, that's familiar. Yeah, like the Nazca lines, you can only see them from above, and aliens 10,000 years ago.
So the mythology they're tapping into here is sort of ancient aliens mythology. And when I say that, I do not just mean the TV show. I do not just mean the Eric von Däniken books that the TV show is based on. Ancient aliens mythology was deeply ensconced in comic books and pulp fiction well before people started to try and claim this stuff was real. It shows up even in H.P. Lovecraft and whatnot. And there's this very specific idea of thing. One of the ideas that they show in this movie, this idea that humans must assume that aliens are gods. That our ancient ancestors would have no other idea of what these creatures could be except deities of some kind, and so they're really hitting that. That shows up. There's some really great examples of that in early DC comics. Rip Hunter, in particular, the time traveling comic in the 1950s, that talks about aliens must be gods and that alien technology must be magic and all this stuff. And so they're really hitting. These are like cultural tropes that circle around ancient alien lore that have been taken over to a certain extent by the TV show, but actually have their origination in some fictional examples. And you totally get, and this is to me, I don't know how deep Lucas per se is as a believer in any of this stuff himself, but if you tie this in, like how does this movie fit into the arc of the rest of this stuff? Indiana Jones is always about these tremendously powerful spiritual objects that have an energy or a power about them that we cannot explain with our own material world. And the first 3 movies, it's a little easier to say, well, they're religious somehow, they're spiritual somehow. But with this 4th movie, we're plugging directly into this ancient alien world where, Giorgio Tsoukalos, the guy with the hair from the Ancient Aliens show, recently said, and he's echoing what von Däniken said for years, but he recently said at a conference that all human religions are based on misunderstood alien encounters.
Wow.
And so if you take Crystal Skull is gospel here. If we say Crystal Skull is actually perhaps the movie that's trying to explain the entire Indiana Jones franchise, what they're really saying with this movie is the Ark of the Covenant wasn't God, that was aliens. The Shankara stones wasn't something else, that was aliens. They're if we take this movie to its fullest extent, they're applying this idea across the entire Indiana Jones universe.
Yeah, like everything we can't explain must have been aliens.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Huh.
There we go.
They should have done it. They should have done the full what was that, Spectre, James Bond. They tied all the Daniel Craig movies together with one bad guy. They should have done that with this.
It's all aliens. It was all aliens all along.
Is it? Do you find with students, like when you've got freshmen coming in, and say someone's taking an archaeology or an anthropology class, do people come in believing, especially with all the TV stuff and everything in the media, that a lot more ready to believe that stuff is aliens? And do you have to convince students? There was a guy that built this, or some lady built this, or.
I always get some, in terms of, I had a student in my office just last semester who was a big Ancient Aliens fan and was really excited to learn more about archaeology and whatnot. And I get a lot of people who are interested in things like Graham Hancock's books and claims. There's a question of how vocal some of them will be, because they don't necessarily want to come out and tell me these things sometimes. And I'm happy. I always try to encourage having these conversations. I think that there's some survey statistics I try to emphasize to people, because this is my bag. I talk a lot about pseudo-archaeological claims like Atlantis and ancient aliens and whatnot. It's something I spend a lot of time doing public outreach on and actual research on. This is stuff it's this is fun. I like talking to you guys, but this is stuff we actually need to talk about, because we're at a point where surveys results over the last couple of years have shown that 41% of Americans now believe that ancient aliens really exist, that archaeological evidence actually shows evidence of alien contact. And I promise you, it really does not. It really, this is, so to me, that survey, that's 41% of Americans thinks that ancient aliens is real. That's 41% of Americans thinks that my profession is lying to the world, and that's a problem. We got to talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, so
Sounds a little
this
slippery.
is really interesting. So, what is it with Americans that draws them to those conclusions or that mythology? I mean, why do you think? Why would 41% of Americans believe that?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a long list of things I've been working on, and actually I've been trying to weave this narrative into a book. But I think in a lot of ways, especially what makes the Americans different from a lot of the rest of the world, goes back to what this movie hits on: lost city legends. I mean, when Europe shows up, American culture today is this enormous hybrid of European settler colonialism. And when Europeans show up in the Americas, they fundamentally actually face a world they don't understand. As European intellectuals of the 1400s and the 1500s thought they understood the history of the world, and they struggled to explain where two whole continents came from that were full of people. And
That's pretty
this is, part and parcel where Lost City, El Dorado, and Cibola and all these other legends kind of come from, is that they fundamentally don't understand how to explain the history of these continents. And I think that sort of confusion sits at a core, actually, for why Americans still wonder about this stuff.
Why is there a tendency then to sort of spackle, over the holes? Then if to either I don't say, I guess, make up stories or have to believe phantasmagorical stories, that as opposed to, I don't know, something that might be, I mean, I understand sometimes the truth may be more pedestrian. It's not as exciting. Yeah,
that's what I'm wondering. Is it just more fun to, wow, aliens? Oh, it's amazing. Wondrous things happened.
I think, again, this hits, this is a long development. This didn't just happen in the last 5-10 years. This is something that I think is, a century or more old, in that the Americas were full of civilizations that, by and large, had no writing.
Mhm.
There are obvious exceptions. The Maya had lots of writing, but for people in the present day trying to understand those ancient civilizations, we couldn't read, especially not in any detailed way, we couldn't read Maya writing until about 15, 20 years ago.
It's incredible.
And even today, there's a pretty short list of people who can really digest this stuff and understand it. And so that presents you with an ancient landscape, so to speak, a mythic landscape almost, where you have human civilization that rises and falls. And like, I love, one of my favorite archaeological sites in Mexico is Teotihuacan.
Oh yeah.
Teotihuacan is huge. It covered 16 square kilometers. It was home probably to at least 100,000 people, if not more. It's got streets, it's got alleyways, it's got apartment complexes, to say nothing of the giant pyramids. And the city was inhabited for 700 years. That's 700 years of human urban life that we know relatively little about. And I think there's a tremendous tendency to look at that and paint stories onto it. Archaeology, as much as I love my profession, there's only so much we can say. If we don't have that written word, we can tell you, when this place was occupied. We can tell you some of the things people did there, but we can't tell you their, outside of some limited spaces, we can't tell you their names. We can't tell you their hearts or their desires or what they thought about when they fell asleep at night. And so you have this, I think in the Americas in particular, you have this huge landscape of obvious human presence, of obvious complex societies. And it's pretty, my profession can only paint a narrow picture of that sometimes.
Wow. Can I ask you a completely off-topic Teotihuacan question?
Sure.
So my wife and I were there last October, and off to the side of the I think it's the Pyramid of the Moon, the one that's at the head of that main street. There's like an old, like I think they were sort of luxurious apartment dwellings, and one of them has like a pool inside. It's like a courtyard, and there's a pool in the courtyard. And somebody had told us that was an astronomical observatory, and I hadn't seen anything else about that. And I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
For that particular structure, I don't know. I've been in there. There was nothing that screamed to me about it of an astronomical alignment. Cultural astronomy, trying to understand what other cultures knew about the night sky, it's really prone to exaggeration sometimes. There's clearly some amazing detailed knowledge that cultures in Mesoamerica had. I mean, we have, one of the surviving books written by Maya people has an eclipse table in it that accurately forecasts solar and lunar eclipses for centuries to come. So clearly there's a significant knowledge base here, and there are plenty of examples of buildings in Mexico that were built to align with different solar or lunar or stellar phenomena. But when you get to individual buildings, there's some major arguments sometimes, and there's a lot of disagreement about the significance of particular buildings. Like, clearly the overarching body of knowledge is there, but narrowing down to the particulars can be really problematic sometimes.
I read recently in the news that they found this other continent under Europe. Did you? And so of course the speculation, there was speculation that was Atlantis. Was that Atlantis?
No. Yeah, there was that was a really crappy news article. I read that one and it made me very mad. The geology of it is totally real. Like, I'm not a geologist, and so I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole here. But yes, like, there is some plate or whatever that clearly shows some previous history that is not look different than it does today. But even the article itself sort of acknowledged that this had nothing to do with the Atlantean legend. It's just whenever anyone ever talks about a continent that isn't the 7 that we know today, they just always paint the name Atlantis on it for no apparent reason. This is totally this is one of my pet peeves. It's got to
be out there somewhere.
Like, if we ask the question, like, where, people always ask, where is Atlantis? And they never ask, well, why are we even talking about Atlantis. And the very quick story is that the only ancient source for Atlantis is Plato. That is the root source for all, is the Greek philosopher Plato. And you know what Plato did for a living? He wrote allegorical examples. He didn't write history. And like every one of his dialogues, he would make up a story to try and prove a point. And for some reason, this one particular, out of all of the stories that he made up, people have launched onto this one mythical story that he made up and decided that this one must be true and not the dozens of others.
Wow. So I'm just thinking, we got Atlantis, we have like Nazca lines with aliens landing, or one thing that was really confusing here is I was trying to figure out, so which came first? Did the aliens land and then the Nazca built the Nazca lines, or was it one of those build it and they will come? Like the Nazca built the landing strip, they built the Nazca airport, and then the aliens were like, oh, there we go.
Yep. No, von Däniken, basically was Eric von Däniken, the guy who wrote some of the early, most influential ancient astronaut books, was totally in the camp that they were made for the aliens to look at. Because why else would you make giant geoglyphs if you can't? And truth is that it's fun, and people all around the world have done similar things in lots of different capacities. But my favorite, really, about the Nazca lines is that von Däniken at one point did say there's some very long straight ones, and he's like, oh, it's an alien landing strip for the UFOs. Well, those Nazca lines are it's like dusty gravel. Like literally, if you drag your foot in them, you can do that. Some jerk destroyed one of them a couple of years ago by driving his truck on top of it. Yeah,
I saw that.
This doesn't work very well as a landing strip then, because if anyone had landed on it, they would have completely and utterly destroyed it in half a heartbeat.
Well, what are the other big popular ones? We got Atlantis, we got the Nazca lines. Obviously, I guess the pyramids always have aliens. Are always showing up at the pyramids.
Yeah, what should Indy be going after in Indy 5?
We like a Stonehenge thing.
Yeah, Stonehenge would be good because they've done nothing ancient henge related. You know what? They're probably going to go to Göbekli Tepe. If you're going to do anything, except that, it doesn't fit the chronology because, of course, Tepe wasn't was not known in Indiana Jones's lifetime, but
these movies have never stretched credulity or truth or facts to their stories.
Never. It's all very accurate. I think, ancient megalith, I think, is where they would go next. One way or another. Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, Inca masonry. I think they will try, if they're going to try to keep plumbing the same vibe that they got going in Crystal Skull, they're going to go ancient megalith.
You heard it here first, everybody.
Yep.
Speaking as someone who has never spoken to George Lucas or Steven Spielberg in my life.
They made you sign something where you would have to say that. We understand. We read you loud and clear.
Have you ever, David, on a dig or, when you've been out in the field, have you ever found something and turned to one of your coworkers and said, what is this?
Yes.
I mean, actually, have you ever really just been completely perplexed with something you found? Yeah. And what was it?
We were out. I worked on a survey many years ago in Mexico, and we were just looking for new archaeological sites that hadn't been reported. And we would do two things. We would look for stone architecture, and we would look for pottery. And when we only found the stone architecture, we were always a little suspicious. And we only found pottery, we're like, well, where are the buildings? And it's, we always wanted to find the two together if we could. And we found a site with some stone clearly stacked up on top of one another. But they were really small for Maya houses. They were about half the size of a normal Maya house. And they would have like 2 to 3 corners, but we never found one with 4 corners. And it was just, and we spent like 5 hours wandering around this place and found no pottery whatsoever. It was one of these things where like everything about it was wrong. It looked in no way, shape, or form did it look like a normal Maya site, and we couldn't find the pottery to go with it. And yet the stones were clearly stacked on top of each other, and we would see clear 90-degree corners, which you don't typically get in the natural environment. And so, yeah, we scratched our heads for about 5 hours, and then we decided that some drunk guys went out into the woods and just stacked some stones up in front of it, and we went on with our lives.
And why do people immediately turn to ancient aliens when really the answer is probably drunk guys? It's always probably drunk guys.
Yeah. way simpler answer than ancient aliens.
Occam's
Well,
razor,
you
everybody.
said you think everybody should have you invite discussions about this, and you do, I guess, as you said, outreach for archaeology and especially the Mayans and pseudo archaeological stuff. What is the one thing you want everybody to know? If you had to pick one thing, you'd say, "Damn it, listen to me. This is what I've found out."
I think, if you look at pyramids, Stonehenge, Inca masonry, and you think, oh my God, how could people have done that? It had to have been aliens. I want you to think how much we're going to blow your mind when we can show you that it actually was people who did it nonetheless.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. You think
Yeah.
we just are always undermining the ancient civilizations? They couldn't have known that.
Yeah, and it really is. This is where it gets sad, actually. Ancient aliens, in particular, if you follow the literature trail of where all this stuff comes from and how it developed and changed over the years. Ancient aliens is a rehashed colonial conspiracy theory, actually. When, as I was saying, when Europeans spread out around the Americas, they find all these ruins and they don't understand how to explain them. And so there's a huge number, especially in the 19th century, there's a huge number of legendary lost races, usually legendary lost white races, because the Europeans refused to believe that these places could have been built by someone who wasn't white. And Ancient Aliens has just replaced the lost white race with the grays. They're doing the exact same thing. They're making the exact same arguments, and there are plenty of times where we can trace sort of arguments back through the literature, say that they're borrowing these old colonial conspiracies that were pejorative against indigenous people, and they're just continuing them to present day, but they're changing the guilty party, so to speak.
Wow. So is the idea behind that thinking, is it to just sort of discredit these native people, or is it just like they actually can't get their heads around the idea that these people could have achieved this without the help of either white people or gray aliens?
Especially back in the 19th century or earlier, it was fundamentally people believed that it could not have been indigenous populations that could have done these things. In the modern day, there's if you dig into some of the things that Eric von Daniken wrote, he wrote some very blatantly racist things on occasions.
Yeah.
He literally calls the black race a failed alien experiment at one point, and I think it's his third or fourth book.
Sure.
So there's some very specific ways in which von Daniken says some things that are very sketchy, if not outright racist. I think this is one of those tough lines when. Who watches the TV show Ancient Aliens? I don't think the majority of the viewers are inherently racist or are attracted to it for racist reasons. I think conspiracy sells, and they found an old conspiracy theory that they could repackage and splash up with some fancy graphics, and they didn't really care where it came from.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's depressing.
Yeah, that was sad. You're right. You're right. It did get sad.
Who wants to go watch a movie instead? What do you say?
How about a little bit of some joy?
Sure.
Oh, hey.
Yes, coming in over the wire from Professor My Sister Porter. Yes. Let's see. Oh my gosh, there's 2 questions. That's really good.
Wait, is she allowed to do that?
Well,
cheating.
yeah, I think on this one it's okay.
Okay.
How thick a neck does a crystal skull require to be supported without a neck pillow? And how is this going to help them find Ox, or have they forgotten Ox?
I don't know.
That's a good question. I know.
If they don't get hijacked by the Russians in the next scene, do you think Indy's on the first plane back to Connecticut to sell this thing?
Yeah, maybe.
Here,
How am I supposed to find Ox now? Forget it. I tried.
Well,
Found a skull. I'm
yeah,
good.
we don't. Yeah, exactly.
Ox.
Oh, maybe he's wondering if those ships are still there.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap this up,
Yeah.
I do need to. I need to go back to what is this thing, because I don't think we got Pete's read on it. Like Jer was staunchly, it's a goofball thing that Indiana Jones would never say to this punk Mutt, and I'm sort of thinking, no, I think Mutt and Indy have a little bit of a, not a bond yet, maybe, but kind of a blossoming understanding or something. Where are you with this, Pete?
Well, I was on Team Jerry with this, but I think, David, you really swung me with your argument that Lucas really wanted to put in a sense of wonder here, and I think Indy's just so overcome here with that sense of wonder that he's going to break his what might normally be a facade with Mutt and shares this with him, and maybe that's what breaks the ice between them.
Maybe.
Or maybe his brain's just still addled from the nuclear explosion in the lead fridge.
Another possibility.
What is this? What am I doing here?
I think once again we just have another case of he's breaking something, but it's the fourth wall. He's asking us, what is this?
There we go.
Breaking the contract with the audience. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. This has been incredible. This is an excellent episode.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. It was good fun.
Yeah. And you actually mentioned off the air that this is your favorite Indiana Jones movie, and I don't know how
Favorite in
seriously I
quotes.
should take that. Okay.
It's air quotes. It's I always tell people this is the fourth Indiana Jones movie in the trilogy.
There you go. Perfect. Why didn't we think of that?
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for coming on. Thank you all out there for listening.
Oh.
And what?
Can I would love to tell people to check out David's Twitter account.
Oh, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at DSA Archaeology. Same thing. If you don't like the Twitter, I've got DSA Archaeology on Facebook and even Instagram. So you can come find me wherever I'm at.
Excellent. Spread
Cool.
the
Yeah,
truth.
it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Excellent. And you can find us on Facebook at Indiana Jones Minute and the what is it? See, now I'm messing it up. Pete, you infected me.
The Listeners Crusade.
Indiana Jones Minute and the Listeners Crusade over on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We don't talk about YouTube a lot. We got a YouTube channel over there, Indiana Jones Minute, where you can get all our episodes and our little fun previews of seasons and stuff. Check it all out. Keep yourselves busy until
We're taking a fermata, everybody.
when we will be back with minute 56 of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull here on the Indiana Jones Minute.
What is this?
What is this?
Yeah, what is this?
What is this?
What is this?
That's it. What is this?